The throng at Cypress Grove Cemetery stood gravely around the recently excavated grave, their faint murmurs changing everything. What if the person you thought you know had made sacrifices during their life that you never imagined? Among the mourners, an elderly black woman stood out, though unintentionally. Her deep green dress flowed modestly around her, and her silver hair was neatly tucked beneath her simple hat, displaying the beautiful representation that time would try to outshed. The 3 generations of hat rangers, she clutched a single red rose, her hands steady, but her eyes revealed a weight of emotion far heavier than those around her. The family, friends, and acquaintances had gathered to pay their respects to Robert Henley, a man revered for his charitable work and warm presence in the community. The polished black headstone gleamed in the afternoon sun. She stood at the fringe of the gathering, mute, while others made small talk, and few acknowledged her. When she arrived at the grave, she paused to gaze down at the polished casket before carefully placing the rose on top and turning to face the crowd. Her presence was both commanding and subtle, and it wasn't until the pastor finished his final prayer that she slowly moved forward, making her way to the front. The only sound she heard was the crunch of gravel beneath her heels as the mourners parted to make room for her. The gathering erupted in amazement as she said, "My name is Hattie DeLay." She started off clearly and steadily. "I doubt many of you know me, but I knew Robert better than anyone here." Hattie's gaze went over the sea of faces, revealing a sea of brows, furrowed mouths, and whispers of interest. Who was this woman? And how could she claim such a profound connection to the man they all believed they knew so well? She said, "Before today ends, you'll understand why I'm here, and you'll understand the Robert Henley." With a composed yet determined expression, the rumors had died down, leaving only the sound of leaves rustling. But what Hattie was going to reveal would make everyone reevaluate all they believed they knew about the man they had come to celebrate. Most of you were unaware that her words hung in the air, thick with an unspoken promise. The crowd leaned in slightly, their eyes flickering with curiosity as she continued, her voice tinged with pride and pain. "I met Robert 50 years ago." And she began looking off into the distance, as if the memories were playing before her. At that time, people like me weren't welcome in places like this, so I took a deep breath, and her voice carried a calm authority that compelled everyone to listen. "We met on the steps of a church where we were holding gatherings. Robert was a young man at the time, full of energy and ambition. He was a teacher, but his passion was the civil rights movement. He didn't hesitate to stand by me, even if it meant losing his job or facing threats." Gasps went through the group. Although the Robert they knew was gentle and giving, no one had ever heard of his involvement in these kinds of conflicts. Hattie let the wit of her words settle before pressing on. "We weren't just comrades in the fight for justice," she said, her voice softening. "We were friends, no more than friends. We became each other's family when the world seemed determined to tear us apart. He was there for me when I lost my sister to the violence of those times, and I was there for him when he had to rebuild his life after." Being ostracized by his own Hattie's hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her hat, her gaze fixed on the casket. "We shared meals, stories, tears. He called me his sister in every way that mattered, even when it wasn't safe for him to say it out loud." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, the gravity of her words sinking in. It was hard to reconcile this image of Robert with the man they knew, a polished philanthropist who had quietly helped many, but never spoke of his own battles. "But," she said, her voice growing firmer, "what I'm telling you isn't just about the past. It's about the man he became because of those struggles." She paused, scanning the crowd, letting the silence stretch. Just long enough, but what Hattie shared next would go beyond their bond. pulling back the curtain on sacrifices none of them could have imagined. I didn't just survive the times we fought through them, but that fight demanded sacrifices that left marks on both of us, marks most of you would never see, she said, her hands clenched tightly around her purse, her voice unwavering as she spoke. In 1967, she looked at the crowd, her piercing eyes meeting theirs as if daring anyone to look away. The school board labelled Robert's attendance at the Selma March unbecoming conduct, but we all knew it was retaliation. He didn't tell anyone about it because he didn't want sympathy. Instead, he packed up his belongings and moved into a small one-bedroom house on Montgomery's south side, where he lived on tutoring gigs and never once left the fight. Hattie's voice cracked slightly as she went on. When my own house was firebombed in retaliation for hosting meetings, it was Robert who arrived in the middle of the night with his car and drove me and my two nephews to safety. Without hesitation, knowing full well the risk, her expression softened as she turned back to the casket, revealing that Robert was not the polished man in the tailored suit most of you remember, but someone who braved fire for the people he cared about. The crowd stood in silence, enthralled, as she took a folded piece of paper out of her purse and said, "Holding it up is a letter Robert wrote to me in 1972. I want to read just one part to you." She unfolded the letter carefully, her hands shaking just enough to demonstrate how much it meant to her. And then she started reading aloud, her voice trembling but clear. "You remind me, every day, that love is not about blood, but about who shows up when the world turns back on itself. Hattie, you are the sister I picked when life gave me no others. We have shared burdens that no one should have to endure, yet I would carry them again, for you without hesitation." The crowd, which had been so stoic, changed visibly as she spoke the final line. Some were dabbing at their eyes, while others were staring at the ground in shame for not knowing this side of the man they had come to honor. How many of you here knew any of this? How many of you cared enough to ask? She let the question hang in the air like a heavy fog. But as the truth of Robert's sacrifice sank in, Hattie revealed something even more profound, an act of courage that would forever redefine his legacy. The air seemed heavier as Hattie continued her words, laced with both sorrow and defiance. "There's one more truth about Robert, a truth that none of you would have guessed, but it shaped everything he stood for. For years, Robert concealed the fact that he was providing for a boy he couldn't publicly claim due to the mother's identity. He didn't only fight for others, he fought a battle that no one could see." The group let out a collective gasp. As Hattie's gaze traveled over the shocked faces, she moved forward without hesitation. His son, Samuel, was born to a lady Robert was unable to marry due to the time and location of their residence. "The stars of this momentary strength," she continued, "did not exist, sucking the life from the rest of our world.